Hello and welcome to Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. This is Mitch Ratcliffe, your host, and we're back with another innovator interview, and this time with Charlotte Hugman, who is the researcher for climate and energy benchmarking at the World Benchmarking Alliance, which is an organization funded by, amongst many different public and private organizations, the Walton Family Foundation, the family behind Walmart. Welcome to the show, Charlotte. How are you today?
Thanks so much, Mitch. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Very well. So can you tell us how the Alliance came to be? And then let's jump into the research you've done on the decarbonization of the energy system in the United States and around the world.
Sure, happy to. So the World Benchmarking Alliance, or WBA, responds to the fact that the private sector has a crucial role to play in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. But to boost companies' motivation, there needs to be real change in the way that their impact is measured. And so the WBA is benchmarking companies to compare performance on the global challenges that the world faces. It was founded in 2018 by three founding partners, Aviva, Index Initiative, and the UN Foundation, alongside supporting governments and a diverse range of stakeholders. So the WBA will act as an independent and transparent body, and it now has over 150 allies, which enable it to be a successful driver of change. The benchmarks created by the WBA are free and publicly available to all, and they empower stakeholders, including consumers and investors, as well as employees and business leaders, with key data and insights to encourage sustainable business practices across all sectors.
Now, you've benchmarked a number of different things, and you've identified four major transformations, which include digital technology, green energy, a number of things. But you focused in this particular report on energy producers, both the 50 largest energy producers in the world, and you identified the 10 largest in the United States. And you found that 70% of those U.S. companies have actually fallen backwards in their decarbonization performance recently. How is electricity production's transformation to a renewable power generation base progressing overall? And why is electricity such a keystone in the carbon revolution?
Good question. And to take that first question about why this is so keystone and crucial in the decarbonization and energy transformation. As a producer, or as producers of electricity used in industrial processes and used by individuals, this sector sits effectively between the primary energy sources such as coal, oil, gas, nuclear, hydro, wind, and solar, and the downstream users of electricity, including, for example, electric vehicles. The electric utilities sector is therefore often seen as the great enabler to cleaner and greener energy use. And with electricity demand predicted to increase by nearly 80% by 2050, decarbonisation of the electric utilities sector is crucial in enabling change, and it needs to be at the forefront of our transition and transformation to a low-carbon economy. Mm-hmm. In short, we can electrify things like transport with electric vehicles all we like, but the electricity needs to be generated in a low-carbon way too.
Well, and so let's dig in on the progress towards low carbon energy production, because of course even what we're talking over right now, the internet, is driven by electricity that is largely generated from petrochemicals. Now you found, as I mentioned earlier, that 70% of the U.S. companies have actually decreased their progress or have fallen short in the near term, and that half of the EU electricity producers are doing the same thing. Why is it happening? And is part of this due to COVID?
Sure, absolutely. So the benchmark does indeed assess whether companies' performance would improve, stay the same, or in fact worsen in the near term based on the elements within the assessments. Mm-hmm. And these elements look at historic, present and future projected performance. And for this benchmark, that was against a well below 2 degrees scenario pathway.
Right.
The benchmark therefore looks at longer term sustainability and transition to a low carbon economy, rather than the shorter term perspective that we currently have, for example, on COVID. And it remains to be seen what longer-term impact COVID may have on companies' management approaches and actions in relation to the low-carbon transition. But to answer your question, to date, the sector has been making some reductions in the carbon intensity of electricity production, but more ambitious reductions are needed to achieve the goal of the Paris Agreement to keep global warming to well below 2 degrees. For example, it's very noticeable that fewer than 10% of the 50 keystone companies benchmarked in this sector, seen as the potential great enabler of low carbon energy, actually have targets that are aligned with the Paris Agreement. And there's still a strong fossil fuel dependency. So with 70% of the 50 companies in the assessment already set to exceed their carbon budgets out to the year 2033. There are some interesting examples actually of US companies which are, I would say, going against this majority trend of potentially worsening in the near term, and that seem to display some more positive, likely near-term trends, such as Vistra, which is doing probably in the near term relatively better due to coal plant closures and climate positive statements, and also Xcel Energy, which saw a 10% drop in emissions in 2019.
So let me ask just a kind of a blunt question. Which companies in the United States can customers be confident that if they're using that company, they're working with a company that is making progress? You mentioned Vistra and Xcel. Are there any others?
So what I would say, Mitch, is that listeners can use the WBA's Electric Utilities Benchmark website and compare results from the largest keystone companies. As I mentioned, all of our results are freely and publicly available. So it's possible for them, for example, to explore and learn about whether companies have coal phase-out dates and to understand better the capacity of low-carbon energy provision in a provider's generation mix. And also interesting, I think, for listeners is to look at our assessment of consistency of the company's actions across the board and whether they're contributing to a low-carbon and preparing for a low-carbon economy. Sorry, go ahead.
An additional question then, because we will provide a link for the listeners to check your benchmarks. But many other companies are not going to be listed in that benchmark. And so how could a listener learn a little about their local energy providers' decarbonization progress? What questions should they be asking their utility?
Absolutely. So what I would say is that listeners and anyone interested can use the benchmark to understand some of the questions and types of things that are important to be looking for with their local energy provider. And using that, they can then further educate themselves, for example, by looking on companies' websites, looking into their sustainability reports and policies, and then comparing what the companies say, perhaps with those of independent advisors. So, for example, in the UK, Citizens Advice would be the kind of independent advisor that consumers might turn to.
So could a small investor make a difference by applying the benchmarks to their portfolio? It sounds as though they could. Do these small efforts by an investor to support decarbonization really add up to a big difference?
So what's important to remember is that the free and publicly available World Benchmarking Alliance results include these keystone companies, so really the largest companies with influence and dominance in a given industry that will have a huge effect on the structure and the system in which they operate. That said, companies of all sizes should be open and transparent about their aims, successes, and progress towards the low-carbon economy. And accountability at all levels will drive us towards a greener economy. And from a decarbonisation perspective in particular, companies need to implement sufficiently resilient long-term strategies to enable a successful low-carbon transition. So of the
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to just say, of the companies in the benchmark, 42 out of the 50 have a low-carbon transition plan, or have made transition planning commitments, but closer examination shows insufficient action.
So that's an important point. And when you're looking at a local utility, there may be some buzzwords and some greenwashing going on that you need to be aware of. So are there key things that that companies tend to say but then not act on?
I'd say that goes to the suggestion that consumers and anyone else interested can look to the kinds of questions that are being asked in the assessments that create our benchmark, and indeed educate themselves through company websites, reports, and policies, and compare those claims with any information they can gain from independent advisory services.
Okay, great. We'll try to call some of that out in our article introducing the podcast as well. So let's change gears just a little bit, and let's talk about how the World Benchmarking Alliance sees the role of decarbonization and sustainability in the debates in the upcoming U.S. elections. What are the most important policies and legislation that you think listeners need to be tracking as they make a decision about who to support this November?
Sure, yeah. I fully understand this is a very big event, and although
for us it's extremely important.
And although not being based in the US myself, I am following developments closely. What I would say is that wherever people are in the world, if they're interested in understanding environmental topics and the climate crisis, they can listen out for and understand elements such as commitment to the Paris Agreement, a response to the climate crisis. And I would say in this industry or in this topic area, it's interesting to understand investment in the energy mix, such as renewables or, development of natural gas and other kinds of fossil fuel supplies.
So would you say that tax incentives for solar or wind transition, for instance, would be something that a voter should be looking for their representative to be supportive of?
I would say that for anyone, anywhere, that is that understanding the kind of support for furthering solar as an example of renewable and low carbon energy would be an interesting thing to listen out for.
Great. Now, let me just ask, what else does the World Benchmarking Alliance have coming in the next few months? Are there additional reports or programs that will help individuals support the most progressive energy and industrial companies?
Thank you for asking that. So we're very busy here at the World Benchmarking Alliance, applying our systems thinking approach to benchmarking, which means that we're looking across various system transformations. So this electric utilities research was the second output for our climate and energy benchmark. Next year on climate, we're due to release a ranking of companies in the oil and gas sector. As well as this, the World Benchmarking Alliance is working on assessing companies through a social lens. So we will apply this to the decarbonization and energy transformation by understanding what to assess regarding a just and equitable transition when it comes to decarbonizing the economy. And in other systems, we'll be releasing research on apparel companies' contribution on gender issues and digital companies' contributions on, as you mentioned, digital inclusion. The key thing to note here really is that all of this upcoming work is freely and publicly available on our website for all to use.
Well, that's the important point. And folks listening, go to worldbenchmarkingalliance.org. That's all one word, worldbenchmarkingalliance.org. And you'll find an incredible wealth of information that you can dig into. And we're going to be using more of that information here at Earth911. I want to thank you, Charlotte Hugman, for joining us today on the show.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Well, so that was Charlotte Hugman. She's the researcher for climate and energy policy work at the World Benchmarking Alliance. She just helped complete the benchmarking of the top 50 electric generation companies in the world, and we urge you to check it out. This is Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, and I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host. We're going to be back soon with another innovator interview, and we hope that we'll be hearing from the World Benchmarking Alliance again. So take care, folks, and be green.